with your weekly market analysis brought to you by Gas Trader. This is for the week of November 9th to November 13th. As always, I'm joined here by my co-host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter from the NASDAQ. Jill, how are you?
Good, doing great. My favorite piece of content I do each week because I know it's the last one.
It's the end of the week for us both. So great. So getting ready for the weekend, and we have a lot of news on our plate because the week opened up with a bang, right? We had our vaccine, which kind of brought the market to a nice big gap up. We have all kinds of election news. We got COVID-19 surging worldwide, and then of course we have this week we're going to be looking at some of the winners and losers getting ready for the Christmas holiday season. So first, let us start with the election update, Jill. So what are your thoughts on what's going on with the election and with the recounts and all that? I'm sure you've spoken a lot about that this week.
We have spoken about the election ad nauseum for quite some time. It's interesting. So Arizona's been called for Trump. Arizona's been called for Biden. North Carolina's been called for Trump. I believe one of the senators from Arizona had conceded as well. It's kind of happening as we're talking, so I haven't had the opportunity to get through the headlines. But you know, it's my concern is first we blame the votes, then we blame the process, then we blame the voting machines. Right? It's the fact that we're devaluing our democratic process is really concerning. And I don't know if it necessarily relates to the markets, but it does have an overhang because in the middle of all this, we still don't have a strategy to combat COVID-19. And the problem is that we have more hospitalizations, not just in regions like New York and New Jersey and California like we had last time, it is more widespread throughout the country. So it's not like we have additional resources that can come in from other parts around the country to help all these hospitals that are being overwhelmed. Plus, we also don't have federal support as well. So it's a concern. We're hearing Chicago going to a modified lockdown. New York and New Jersey have already done some modified restrictions. And of course, that is going to be a concern when it comes to, how the economy is doing. And I think, there's a lot of things at work here, and really the election is just, it's noise that just shouldn't have to be there. We should be thinking about transitioning and having a peaceful, cohesive transfer of power. And, we did it in 2016 and we can do it again in 2020. So I think, I believe Trump was supposed to give a speech from the Rose Garden at 4:00. It was supposed to be around Operation Warp Speed and what's happening with the vaccination process. I don't think he's on yet. I haven't seen any headlines, but he really has not made that many public appearances since the election has been called. So, I don't think it's going to have, I just don't know what the impact's going to be, with what he has to say going forward, because they're going to start to phase out, the administration at some point anyway.
Yeah, so I'm going to have a slightly different take on things. I like to have a positive view of things and try to find the silver lining in every bad situation. So the one thing that I can see positive out of all of this election craziness, and you and I were 100% spot on with saying that the one bad thing that could come out of the election was if we have an agreed upon outcome. And certainly it did not negatively affect the market, which we saw this week, right? I mean, the market still managed to survive. It ended up, with an up week, partially due to the COVID vaccine, which we're going to talk about next. But this is the one silver lining that I can find in all of this, is that people are much more interested in the true electoral process and the rule of law, and people are much better informed about how an election is actually won, okay? Meaning that people now understand more about the Electoral College. I had people from Europe last week or 2 weeks ago when the election actually happened. They were asking me what's going on. And I had to explain about the Electoral College and the way that votes are actually work, and how people vote for their electors, and how the actual vote isn't done until the elections are certified and it's in December, and that generally speaking, a candidate will concede if it looks like they lost the election, but they don't have to concede. So at least all of us in America understand our right to vote better. They understand that everything that goes into the voting process, that the votes are managed by the states. And I think that people really appreciate their right to vote much more than they did, because I do think that we do have to at some point move on. Whatever the case is, if it's 75 million people voted for Biden and 70 million voted for Trump, there's going to be those 70 million. And if we validate the election and both parties end up to review the election results, we're more than likely to go forward together if we go through the election results, and then eventually whoever lost concedes and agrees with the election results and doesn't say that there's fraud or some foul play. So I do think that that's probably the one good thing, is that Americans are taking their right to vote more seriously. And we had a great amount of voter participation. On a negative and a positive note relating to COVID-19, COVID-19 is surging worldwide, meaning Europe has some amazingly large amounts of cases, and in the United States, we're also surging. And even places like South America, it seems like the numbers are picking up. The one good thing that came out this week is that there is a vaccine that's on the horizon. And I mean, I think that Pfizer's 90% success rate, at least this is the early report, that actually looks amazingly good. So what are your thoughts on this early development related to Pfizer's 90% potential success rate in protecting against the virus?
It's quite incredible, for sure. If you look at the average flu, the efficacy rate is about 40%. Granted, there are multiple strains of the flu, but 90% certainly has exceeded, anyone's expectations. So that definitely is positive. I think we'll continue to see more positive vaccination news come out. I will agree with you. We typically do find the silver linings to this situation, and hopefully we'll get civics back into the classroom where it should be taught young and early, just like financial literacy. So I did want to say I agree with you there. But when it comes to vaccination, and you have to be inoculated twice, right? So if
there's a booster, right?
Right.
Get a couple of weeks later.
So, and public service announcement, if you have not gotten your flu vaccine, they're strongly recommending you do. This way they can limit the amount of people going in and out of hospitals and doctors' offices, so you can at least eliminate that scenario. So that's what my doctor told me, in case you haven't gotten yours yet. It's just something to think about. Anyway, so if we have 50 million allocated for the United States, that basically means 25 million, because you have to get inoculated twice. So you would think that they'd go through military healthcare frontline workers. I would even argue people in the service industry that are working in the food stores and coming to your house and so forth. They're the ones that can't help the exposure. We can, because we can isolate ourselves. So I think, there's a couple things at play here. It has to be manufactured at mass scale and get disseminated through the population. And there are going to be people who don't want to take it the first go around. So I think you're looking probably maybe another year and a half before it's more widely available and people actually take it. So it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to play out. Do you have to have it to go to school? Do you have to have it to get on a flight? Do you have to have it to travel? If there'll be any restrictions around that? I mean, if you thought wearing a mask was intrusive, wait till they start, thinking about questions like that. So, it's all amazing, great news. It is the ingenuity of American global science. And by the way, the doctors, with the partner of Pfizer, I can't remember it right now. We've heard about it a million times this week. I can't remember the name. They are actually a Turkish husband and wife that were the ones that were largely responsible for it. So, this is why globalization and collaboration and innovation is a very good thing, despite what anyone says, because this is how we, have arrived to this vaccination news.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually received, there was a kind of a place that had invited me to go someplace, and they said, but in order for you to come to this event, you need to show proof of vaccination. This was in March of next year. So, I had been invited to something and I said, I was thinking about coming. And they said, but please show proof of vaccination now that there's a vaccine available. So that was the first place that had asked for proof of vaccination. So it's interesting that you said, are they going to ask for a vaccination for you to travel? And I'm sure some places are, because I've already been asked by one place.
Right.
And that's a very interesting.
But the whole thing is, if you thought wearing a mask was taking away your rights and it was intrusive and so forth, are vaccinations going to become a political thing also? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but anything is possible, as we've learned. So
I think it's definitely going to be something that will be politicized in the near future, in my opinion. So the next thing is Moderna also had an announcement that their vaccine is on the way. Do you have any new insights on Moderna's vaccine? I know that they had a very, very large production capacity. I did hear some news about Moderna. I don't know what the exact news was. Did you hear any news on that?
I don't think it was Moderna. I know there were other companies that had, to be honest with you, I don't know really what's fresh today. I have been involved in so many other projects.
You have been.
No, it's totally fine. I actually guest lectured for Rutgers Business School this morning. So I was out of pocket till almost 2:00. So I'm still catching up on headlines, but the fact of the matter is we can still expect to get this news rolling out. And then once we get the manufacturing news coming out, that's when you really are blast off.
Yep, absolutely. So the other thing is what are your thoughts on some of the stocks that are going to be good ones to watch? I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings going into the holiday season. I think a lot of people already bought computers and electronics, when the first lockdown round had started. And of course, people had to return to school, kids returning to school. They already got computers and electronics in preparation for the back to school, kind of blast off. Certainly Amazon looks like it has, a lot of potential since everybody is staying at home again and receiving items from home. Any thoughts on who the winners and losers might be? And we're going to be doing a special next week on just this topic. Any thoughts, particularly, especially coming out of earnings season, who the winners and losers may be going into this year's Christmas season?
Well, this isn't any surprise. Department stores, brick and mortar, they have struggled. This is nothing new. Clearly, COVID-19 has accelerated those trends. Foot traffic will be down. Spending is, and I don't remember the exact number. I just saw the report come out. I think Adobe was the one that put the survey out, and the spend per family is projected to be down. I think this year it's going to be more experience. So think about e-gaming, music, anything that's digital is really what's going to be impactful this year. Certainly not travel. And think about it when it comes to the apparel sector too, right? I mean, who's buying clothes when you're going to be hanging out in the house for the most part? So I think, traditional areas will be impacted, but anything that can be as experiential as possible, like e-gaming, music, that sort of thing, will do well. But you're right, there is definitely pent-up demand, because once we start to see the light at the other end of the tunnel, I was talking about that with my manager today. I have not taken any time this year. I typically don't take all of my time. It's impossible when you're following the markets day to day. But I was like, look, I think I get 3-4 weeks. I don't even care if I have to take extra time and not get paid. People are jonesing to travel and get out.
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree. And you know what? Something I didn't even realize, and you could see I'm sporting this nice sports jacket. When I have not. I mean, usually I have a whole closet full of suits. I have not gone to the dry cleaner, and I went to the dry cleaner because I went through my closet and I found that I was missing a few suit jackets, so I must have left them at the dry cleaner. So I went to the dry cleaner and I spoke to the dry cleaners are hurting because everybody's working from home. They're not getting their clothes dry cleaned and they're not cleaning their clothes. So there's really been some unexpected ramifications due to this whole COVID-19. You don't realize that even the dry cleaner and the laundromat is suffering, from this entire thing. But certainly I do think that anything with digital content the e-gaming, all the gaming sector. When I play games with my son, all these kind of big online games. My son has pretty much been going through all of COVID-19 lockdowns, playing online with his friends, and they literally are virtually getting together with virtual play dates. So I think anything e-gaming, anything content related, those are some of the early winners. Of course, Amazon, people, buying stuff, shipping them at home, buying things and having them shipped at home. Obviously, Amazon probably is not going to do as well as they have in the past. I think that people have bought a lot of the items that they would have normally bought. But those are just a couple of the ideas that I figured I'd mention. So I definitely concur that online content is certainly going to continue to be big. And we saw with Disney picked up a lot of subscribers. That was part of the reason why Disney had a pretty good day yesterday. So on to our charts. We have the QQQ. And now what I wanted to point out here while I'm going through the charts is I wanted to point out that certainly the NASDAQ has done incredibly well. We had this huge gap up, related to the Pfizer vaccine announcement. But for the most part, after the huge gap up, we actually closed down from last week's close to this week's close on the QQQ on the NASDAQ. Now, we did have a little bit of a rally at the end of the day today, and we're going to look at that when we bring up the live charts a little bit later on. But for the most part, we have this very volatile whippy pattern. And there's a lot of volume, certainly a lot of selling volume, more so than we've seen in the past. We certainly saw that on Monday and Tuesday, where we gapped up and then we kind of sold off handily. But we did have a nice bounce and recovery, so we did not close totally negatively on the QQQ. You see this a little bit more clearly when you look at the QQQ, where we've gapped up. On the spiders, rather. On the spiders, we gapped up, but we actually closed week over week up. On the QQQ, we closed week over week down. So last week, we had a higher close than this week. And that's why I bring up these weekly charts and put them into perspective with the daily charts. Because sometimes you'll just look at the daily and say, oh, wow, we had a decent week. But when you put on these weekly charts, you can see that we're getting into this area of weekly resistance. And we've actually had one high, a lower high. We actually made a higher high, but we also, since we closed down, it might be considered a rejection of a higher high. So this is something that we definitely want to continue to watch and to see how things close next week. On the SPY, this is really a kind of crazy bar. Now, this is something you do see with gaps. Gaps have a tendency to fill. So we had that huge gap up. I can't remember the last time on the Dow. When we go to the Dow, you'll see it very clearly. We had a 1,700 point gap up on Monday. Jill, when was the last time you had seen on the Dow Jones Industrial Average? I don't remember a 1,700 point gap up on the Dow Jones in my trading career. I don't remember it. I'm sorry. Maybe it happened before, but it's definitely been a long.
Well, probably not, because you have to think of that on a percentage basis as well.
Yeah.
But I would also argue, I think, the S&P, the NASDAQ 100 are certainly better barometers. I feel like the Dow is more of like a media thing. 30 stocks is not indicative, and they're not necessarily the 30 most representative stocks of the economy, but you're absolutely right. 1,700 points is a huge number. Sounds great on TV, but I have to look at it from a percentage basis. But it was an explosive move. It's all that pent-up demand for stocks that are in the financial and energy sector that are components of the Dow.
Absolutely. And I think when we take a look at Pfizer, we'll see, that Pfizer is a Dow component, and that's why it had such a big effect on the Dow. And Pfizer hasn't seen $40 in a very long time. But here we can see the big gap up on the Dow. And of course, that took us. So on all three of the indexes, if we look at the indexes, so the QQQ clearly broke the pre-pandemic high. Okay. The SPY had broken the pre-pandemic high, and it put in a new high. And of course, it rejected off that new high, although it did close to the upside this week. And then finally, the Dow was the last one on that huge, massive gap up. It completed the trifecta of all three indexes have now put in a pre-pandemic high. So the Dow, the S&P, and the Nasdaq, all three have really achieved that making a new high in 2020, even after the pandemic. And I think that was a key statistic that needed to be done. The next thing was we also had a huge gap up on gold, which actually ended up completely failing. So I don't know if gold, it certainly held its support level. So, but gold had this kind of breakout. It looks like it's a false breakout. Now, gold is notorious for making erratic moves. And this was certainly an erratic move on gold, meaning it went all the way up and then all the way back down. Now, the question is whether or not gold is going to continue back to the upside. Certainly that is possible with the printing presses and in all the major currencies, gold being a hedge to those major currencies. So certainly that's something to keep an eye on. It did make what looks to be like a fake or false breakout, and it rejected off that breakout, but it could certainly go back to the upside. But a very interesting chart on the weekly on gold. Last week, we made a move to the upside, and this week we actually went completely in the other direction. And that also brings to the case that the dollar got significantly weaker on Monday, and it's rebounded since. Speaking of hedges against the dollar, Bitcoin has been on a tear. I mean, it's been up for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight weeks. And I know you and I both agree that digital assets seems to be the financial disruptor of the future. Bitcoin is at its it's not its all-time high, but it's close to a major resistance level at 16,000. 18 to 20,000 is its all-time high level. So Bitcoin continues to be on its head. What's your thoughts on digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum going into the new year, Joe? Yeah, well,
they certainly are ending the year super strong. And the more that we continue to get stories out there that we're seeing mass adoption, like we saw with PayPal, like we saw with Square, to legitimize the technology, you're only going to continue to see some of that strength that we've been seeing. And I also think because DeFi, decentralized finance, is becoming such a big thing across the globe as technology and financial access is being democratized, these newer economies that are coming on, particularly through Asia. And I certainly think Africa is going to be the next hotspot for fintech for sure. That's where I'm hinging my bets for the future of fintech. 100%. I used to cover African markets for Voice of America a couple of years before I got to NASDAQ. So I know the markets well, but you have billions of people who do not have legacy traditional financial infrastructure. Everybody's now getting access to technology. It's easier for people to have access to some sort of funding. And I just think digital assets and DeFi are only going to continue to grow.
They all have phones. Everybody has a phone. It's more secure to keep your money in your phone in Africa than to keep it in a bank in many instances. And people, sometimes don't realize that here in the United States, where we have very secure, financial institutions. But in Africa, in some very, very Lagos in Nigeria, very, very big city, all the digital security that digital assets offer. And the other thing that's very interesting is that I know that Angola, which is pretty much a country that's cut off from the rest of the world, they were very, very big and early adapters in a lot of the digital asset space. So I think you're 100% right when you say that digital assets and DeFi certainly is attractive to Africa. And certainly DeFi is kind of synonymous with Ethereum having won the protocol wars. And Ethereum looks incredibly strong. I mean, we have a low, a higher low. I'm a big time Ethereum bull in terms of, just because of DeFi and my understanding of DeFi. You can see here, and technically it looks good as well because you have a low and then a higher low and a potential rejection of that higher low. It just needs to break out above this prior high, and you can see it by that yellow moving average there. The next level up is way up. So Ethereum seems to be a really safe, not safe, but certainly a very interesting cryptocurrency digital asset for you to keep an eye on. So moving right along, we got Pfizer. This is what I was saying about Pfizer not having seen 40 in a long time. This was the pre-pandemic high. Pfizer blew out the pre-pandemic high. I mean, it's going back a couple of years. It's back to a few years ago's level here if you look at the Pfizer weekly chart. And really, Pfizer, I mean, if you see it, it really faded that big move. And that kind of mirrors what went on in the Dow. Pfizer is a Dow component. It's a massive pharmaceutical company. And obviously they had some incredibly good news with the 90% effective rate on early trials related to their vaccine. I even had people in Europe saying, when is Pfizer going to get their vaccine here, because they're tired of their lockdowns. So certainly some very good news with Pfizer. If you look at Moderna also kind of broke out this week. So you could see this week we had a weekly breakout on Moderna. I think that this was in sympathy, partially in sympathy to the Pfizer news, because you can see that at first on Monday, it just gapped up, but it didn't really gap up, quite as significantly as Pfizer. But as the week went on, Moderna certainly followed suit. So it's kind of opposite of Pfizer. Pfizer gapped up way up and then faded, whereas Moderna gapped up less, but then kind of continued higher. And I believe that was because they have higher production capacity than Pfizer, which is one of the things that I had heard, that they're a little bit better set up in terms of producing more vaccines. Although I did not hear how effective their vaccine was or when it would be available, whereas Pfizer, we know it's going to be available probably sooner, but in smaller quantities. And again, all this is kind of still, unconfirmed data and speculation, but certainly good news in an environment where coronavirus cases are surging. So, on that note, any additional information you'd like to share with us, Jill, from your various meetings during the week?
There's really not much new that we spoke about. The theme really hasn't changed that much. I think, when we think about short term and even long term, everything's going to be focused on, of course, the transition with the election, COVID-19 vaccinations, and stimulus, of course. So we have to see how that plays out. But, even though I think the important thing is we got that one element of the physical election out of the way. Mm-hmm. And now we just kind of try and make sense of everything. So, that's really where we are at a standstill. But I do think if I had to pick one thing that gets me the most excited, if I had to think longer term and what I do have to cover, and this is actually, as I start to think about my content planning for 2021, crypto and DeFi is 100% up there. Like that artificial intelligence and the fintech part of it is, we always talk about the markets as part of our day to day, but like if I had to pick my sectors and my spots where I'm in, crypto and fintech and the associated technologies, that's what 2021 is going to be about.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I'd like to bring up some other much less interesting and certainly more boring things that may be on the horizon for 2021. I wanted to bring up infrastructure. I think that no matter who ends up in the White House, certainly it's looking like Joe Biden will end up there, and he certainly talked about infrastructure. Infrastructure, creates a lot of jobs, and a stock that looks really, really good. I just brought it up here on my chart. I was looking at U.S. Steel. So here we can see U.S. Steel looks really, really good. I mean, it's got almost a weekly breakout level on at 1125. If U.S. Steel breaks out above 1125, it could break out. The next level up on U.S. Steel would be all the way up at $15. So U.S. Steel certainly might be a beneficiary of a infrastructure play. I wanted to also, and this was one of the ones that we had mentioned on the Joe Biden list of stocks, if Joe Biden gets into the White House, was also 3M, also kind of pressing up against resistance. The next level up is up at 182. So it's got a nice move to the upside, currently at 168 area. So certainly those two have a lot of upside. And I wanted to also take a look at Amazon, only because the chart Amazon has been up. It certainly could be a pennant formation, but we should certainly watch. It might be a pennant getting ready to break out going into Christmas. And that's on the weekly chart on Amazon, which will usually take a couple of weeks going into Christmas time. We still got go ahead.
Mike, actually, it's interesting. We spoke about this with our market technician on the markets intelligence desk at NASDAQ, and we were taking a look at the same exact thing, the weekly on it, but looking at the lens through the NASDAQ Q, and the NASDAQ 100. And he essentially said the same thing. The charts are nearly identical. And I'd asked you because, of course, you know, I'm more on the fundamental analysis side versus the technical side. You guys understand this better than I do. And I was just like, you know what, Brian, it seems like we've had very definitive either up or down action on the charts in 2020. You can certainly see that, but it seems as if like to the right of that chart, it's the first time we've actually seen like a longer term consolidation, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, there's been no pennant formations on that on Amazon. There was a small pause here back in April and May. Obviously, this was the pandemic pullback. That was really just a 4-week pullback when you look at Amazon. Amazon made a 4-week pullback. It broke out, above its pre-pandemic highs, and then it blasted off to all-time new highs. And now this is actually a healthy correction. And this week, actually, I believe it was Goldman Sachs said that their forecast for 2021 was that the equities markets are going to continue to go up and away. I mean, that was one of the things that I had read from Goldman Sachs. And, obviously we know that Goldman Sachs makes up a very, very large majority of our Treasury and central bank officials, Federal Reserve Bank officials. So, I mean, and if you look at the continued weakness in the US dollar, there's a very good chance that people will continue to kind of store their equity, store their value in the US equity market, in digital assets like cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that would indicate that the stock market, specifically technology, would continue to go higher. And certainly there is a value play in those value stocks if infrastructure is invested in, like I mentioned, U.S. Steel, which was certainly in its doldrums for a long time, but certainly looks like it might be getting ready to break out. So it does really look good for a continued bullishness in the equities market. Amazon is interesting because it hasn't paused, and you're 100% right. It's made no pauses, no breaks, with the exception of a small pullback when the rest of the world was struggling through the pandemic. I mean, Amazon is looking really good, like a bull pennant going into Christmas, which means that possibly break out and go higher. So a lot of interesting charts, to say the least. I just mentioned, because obviously I want to always talk about stocks that have good charts. One good chart was U.S. Steel, 3M. We mentioned U.S. Steel and 3M both on the Joe Biden list. And certainly also Amazon just going into Christmas, as everybody seems to be waiting for packages these days. So on that note, enough of me talking about all the stocks that I like to watch each week. And Jill, it's always a pleasure to have you here with me. And it means that our weekend officially begins now. And if I can find how to get to my presentation here, I can go through our links for social media. Hold on one second. Let's go ahead. And as always, everybody can stay up to tune with all things DAS by signing up for our monthly newsletter and our monthly newsletter emails. You can simply fill out the form at the bottom of the webpage at dastrader.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Dash Trader TV, Market Analysis Reminders. We also you can follow us on LinkedIn and our other social media links, Twitter at /Dash Trader, Facebook and Instagram. And finally, my long-awaited options classes will be starting to release next week. And certainly we'll have a lot of information for those who are interested in learning about options. Jill, I want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Okay. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Well, you have to plug. You're on my show next Friday for options expiration.
Options. Yes. Excellent. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. We're going to be releasing our options classes. So we'll have some nice options content on Trade Talk and also released to you on the Dash Trader, Dash Pro YouTube channel. Everybody, I want to thank you so much for joining us each week. I hope you enjoy our market analysis. Feel free to send us a comment or a message. We'll certainly always entertain anything you'd like to talk about. And see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Jill, have a great weekend.
Thank you, you too. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao. Bye.